Apologies if the audio is a little rough on this one. I've always had some issues with the various recording programs. But all right, with that out of the way, let us just jump in on what we do know and do not know about Emily and her mother, Gail Armstrong. I will say as a preface, I try not to get into this kind of stuff because I think that would just be rank hypocrisy to try to dive too deep into people's personal details, but then expect basically people to respect my personal details. But as they say, there will be exceptions to the rule. And again, it's nothing too groundbreaking. We knew the basics of the biography of Emily and Gail. So Gail apparently is a very dedicated Scientologist and for years worked as an editor and writer for Freedom, which is basically a kind of propaganda organ that the church puts out. But now we have some added details showing she is a much more intense Scientologist than we previously thought. And how do we know this, or why do we know this? Well, Mark on his channel has put out some recent documents and a few valuable clips. I do want to emphasize, although they're kind of promoting this on the channel that this is brand new information, it's actually not. I actually found large bits of it elsewhere, but I'm not going to get into that. But it is correct that Mark, I guess, should be credited for re-emphasizing certain past details. So what did he find? Well, I'm going to chop through a lot of the I guess I'm going to say code words of the church. I will do perhaps a more full breakdown down the road. Again, if you don't know the church lingo, it'll be like, what is this? What is that? What does that mean? But the basic gist is that the COB is David Miscavige. Miscavige is the titular head of the church. And essentially they're going back and forth on how to do speeches for Miscavige. So apparently Gail is confirmed to be working with Miscavige directly with him, his public image, the speeches, so on and so forth. And apparently she got into a bit of back and forth with him and Diane Hubbard. That's one of the children of L. Ron Hubbard. And most of the children of L. Ron have left the church or were pushed out. So Diane is an exception. So it's this kind of behind the scenes politics struggle back and forth. Now, the punchline, and this is pretty shocking, is apparently she did spend time in The Hole. The Hole is this very notorious set of trailers where basically on this secretive base in Scientology, a lot of the high-ranking executives were sent to. There's no nice way of putting it, and I have to watch out for monetization YouTube, but they were hurt physically. It was quite a trial, and I will say that, from what I understand, although all people were mistreated by Miscavige, he does seem to have a little bit of a gender bias. He will, frankly, with men, not hold back. He will get very physical very quickly. He has no issue with grabbing people and striking them. But with women, from what I've seen, on the whole, he does not do that. He will sometimes get physical with them, but he will be much more careful not to, quote, strike them directly. So this seems pretty shocking to me and seems out of practice for him. However, it is Scientology. So for whatever reason, she was sent to the hole for seemingly a long time, but then she left to do some PR propaganda work. And Mark played a small clip where she gave a speech, and it was introduced by Miscavige. So that's very interesting. So we'll look at the clip here. And again, I want to try to forewarn people some mythologies about the Sea Org and Scientology.
A planet. So no, this isn't just charity, this is effective technical delivery. And to tell you about it in exactly those terms, please welcome Ms. Gail Armstrong.
Now we're actually going to see the video that she did, that we just saw the speech for. This is her. That's Gail. And I'll be the trucker. May, hi, and hi.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our global IS campaigns are designed to rescue populations from illiteracy, immorality, drug abuse, and a wanton disregard for human rights.
So this might appear very strange. Like, why would someone who just recently was put into these horrific trailers just be willing to do all this propaganda stuff? But again, the trailers and the whole was quite an experience for a lot of these executives. A lot of them did leave and were disillusioned with all of Scientology. But again, you did have these hardcore few who wanted to stay in. I guess Gail's one of the more hardcore people. Or she's just totally cynical, apparently at this point. She's working on the propaganda films for the church. However, you might still be asking, this doesn't quite add up. I mean, again, if you have the capability of leaving, why do they stay? Well, again, a lot of these channels, and again, I try not to do this too much. And again, let's be very clear that Miscavige is very sadistic and the organization is extremely authoritarian. But let me just give an anecdote to show that some of these channels mislead people about how controlled the people are in Scientology. So one of these activists, who's not really an activist, was shocked when they were basically yelling and screaming at some Scientologists and saying, "You guys have phones? They let you have phones?" Yeah, they have phones. They're not totally slaves. That's just not what is occurring. It's a bit of an odd organization that, quote, the members are allowed in, quote, the real world, but there are a lot of controls. I mean, the main control here is mental. It's not physical control. There are going to be cases where, yes, members are clearly physically coerced and, quote, locked up in some extreme cases. However, on the whole, the preference is to use kind of mind control, brainwashing. I'm skeptical because I do study these things seriously that you can never really truly mind control anyone, but there does seem to be this pervasive atmosphere of persuasion and propaganda. So either Gail really believes, or she knows enough not to believe, but doesn't care because she's getting enough from Scientology. Either way, it's not a good scenario. And now we get back to Emily. What's her role in all this? Well, it's a little murky the more and more research I do, because from what I've seen, although she is friendly to Scientology, the group has done things that you might think would be out of step with Scientology. For instance, they have talked about mental struggles in their lyrics in a few songs. Again, I'm not a hardcore fan. I know the Linkin Park material much more well, as I do Rage Against the Machine and so on and so forth. So it seems like, how could this person be a Scientologist if they're openly gay and queer, and also have lyrics that relate to mental problems, and definitely the Linkin Park songs, and so unless they're going to radically censor themselves, which they are not doing so far, or avoid many of their own catalog, right? Many of their own songs touch upon mental struggles, which unfortunately Chester went through. That was their former lead singer who died tragically. So unless they're going to radically reconstruct Linkin Park, they're going to touch upon those songs and those subject matters. How does that work? Well, again, there is another good anti-Scientologist, and this guy is actually rock solid, Doug Scott Kramer. And I remember this pretty well, where someone asked Doug, because Doug had this very interesting persona, that he looked like a stoner. He grew up in California. He's a very good actor. So he's often cast in roles as either a drug addict or kind of this surfer guy who took a lot of drugs. And if you know the church, they look down upon that. And basically someone asked him in one of his live recordings, saying, well, how does that work out? Did the church ever try to censor you or try to push you not to be in those roles or played around with the script? And again, Doug was famous, but he was not a massive actor like Tom Cruise. And listen, Doug is very brutally honest. Now, he has lied about a few things, but for the most part, he keeps it very, very straightforward. And he said, no, they never really raised the question. They never told me to do this, never told me to do that in terms of the scripts. In terms of actors and musicians, yes, they will push propaganda. I mean, Battlefield Earth is a great example. But on the whole, they seem to have a kind of laissez-faire attitude to, and the script is what it is, it's fine. They don't really seem to care. I guess they were just concerned with the money and or loyalty. It's their main concern, is that you obey the church doctrines and, quote, outside of your roles, but they don't seem to really mind if lyrics and or performances reflect a, quote, anti-Scientology point of view. But again, how hardcore is Emily? It could be she's just more of a passive member, her mom's in the church, and they just negotiated where, okay, you're in the church, I'm in the church, you seem to believe, I don't really believe, but it is what it is, and we're just going to leave it there. Now, some people are speculating, and this is a legit speculation, that because she is working with OSA, which is a very kind of PR propaganda wing of the church, that this is part of a much broader, long-term kind of psychological warfare operation. I mean, I know that sounds silly, but again, OSA and Scientology has done that. They do propaganda. They do try to do psychological operation. This is not totally crazy. It is a very authoritarian organization. I have doubts that there is any kind of long-term planting of Emily, that there was this grand conspiracy of Miscavige to infiltrate Linkin Park and basically use Mike and the guys in the band to forward the, quote, agenda of Scientology. I mean, if there's a group that you'd think would not be hospitable to Scientology, it would be Linkin Park. But again, that's the Linkin Park music, and that's what they publicly show us. Again, privately, it could be Mike and the guys don't mind Scientology, or just don't care about this issue. And that's very disturbing unto itself, because Chester, but oddly, Scientology is very, very condemning of psychiatry and therapy. Again, they are not totally against it. That's actually a myth. They will, in certain cases, allow it, but on the whole, in their propaganda and ideology, they do kind of scapegoat psychiatry as one of the worst things of all time. And that's really a more Hubbard thing. Miscavige keeps repeating the slogans, but whether he really cares, that I really don't know. Again, Miscavige is really hard to pin down. It doesn't seem like he really cares about the ideology. He just cares about the organization. As long as the money is flowing, he really doesn't care what people do. As long as he's in control and the money keeps coming, those are his main concerns. And it is also interesting that Emily was allowed to condemn Danny Masterson. People have noted that she didn't use his name, but it does seem clearly that she's putting some distance between her and Danny. But that's just kind of stating the obvious. Like, some Scientologists, yes, publicly and very openly still support him, right? They wrote letters for him, but many of them are now keeping their distance, even though once upon a time they were close friends. I mean, there's this one case, and again, I do like this woman. I actually like her as an actress from back in the day, Jenny Elfman, there are tons of photos of her and Danny, and her husband are very close to Danny. So there's just a lot of deception going on. People who are putting their distance between them and Danny, that's not exactly who they really are. It seems like deep down they still support him, but they're just not showing it. And then you'll probably have the other case where people are, quote, supporting him, and they don't even like him, but the church is encouraging people to support him. It seems like there's kind of an opportunism going both ways. If you can support him, please do so. But if you don't want to, we're not going to force you. And many people have not. Like, Emily really didn't do anything with Danny as soon as he was convicted, and neither did Laura, right? And they were pretty close together. It seems to be going a little bit all over the place. So is she a long-term OSA spy? I don't think she is, but we need to know a lot more. Is Gail a very dedicated Scientologist? At least publicly and outwardly, she is. And she's not being kept from the public. There are very few photos of her, but she has been in the public, so they're not hiding her. So it's a very weird, tricky situation. It could be they were just that cynical, hoping that Emily, as a public Scientologist, would be let into the group, and people wouldn't figure it out. They have done this before, where it would shock you who is a Scientologist. They could be working for decades, and you have no clue that they are in the church. So they have done this before, where a seemingly very big figure, you have no clue. Oh, they're tied to the church? Yeah, they're tied to the church. They've done this before, so maybe they're just that cynical. But they've clearly been exposed, so what the next step will be, I don't know, but I would assume, given that Gail does do a lot of propaganda and PR work, they're going to be very careful with her public image. Either way. It's not groundbreaking revelations, but we now know a little bit more about Emily and her mother and where they stand with the church.